Antarctica isn't just another place on the map. It's the bottom of the world, a place so empty and so quiet that it feels like the Earth itself forgot to finish it. To most people, it's just white space on a globe, the last blank spot. But if you talk to the men and women who've flown there, who've walked that ice, they'll tell you there's nothing blank about it. They'll lean in, drop their voice, and say things you're not supposed to repeat. Because Antarctica holds things under its skin, things the world isn't ready to face. Picture a horizon so wide, you can't see the end of it. Just ice, wind, and sky. No trees, no animals except the occasional bird, and even they don't stay long. The silence is so thick, it has weight. People who work there say you can hear your own heartbeat echo. And in that silence, every rumor feels louder. Pyramids poking through the snow, doorways cut into ice cliffs, lights slipping across valleys with no sun to power them. Strange maps that drew Antarctica centuries before anyone had discovered it. Scientists who vanish, then come back like ghosts. Silent, hollow, staring at nothing. The official line is simple. Antarctica is just ice and research. Weather balloons, climate stations, penguins, nothing more. But the unofficial stories? They pile up like snow drifts, and the more you hear, the harder it gets to shrug them off. Men who've flown missions there for decades will tell you, there are places you don't go, no-fly zones with no explanation. There are bases with no name, buildings with no windows, and there are doors, massive, black, geometric, cut into mountains of ice, leading into the kind of dark no flashlight wants to touch. It always starts the same way. Somebody goes missing. That's how it was in 1995, when a group of 15 scientists working in Marie Birdland went silent. Every day they checked in, like clockwork, and then one day, nothing. Radio's dead, no signals, no explanation. So the Navy sent a C-130, big transport bird, to swing low over the camp. Brian was flying that day. He'd flown Antarctica before. He knew the cold, the tricks of light, the whiteout that could swallow a mountain. But this time the weather was perfect. Blue sky, no storms, no excuses. He circled low, tighter and tighter, scanning every inch of the base. Nothing. No footprints. No tracks in the snow. Just silence. The base itself was intact. Heaters running, food stacked, radios working. But the people? Gone. A week later, the call came. The same scientists, panicked voices screaming for extraction. The C-130 turned back. This time, the scientists were waiting outside, bags packed, eyes hollow. They climbed aboard and sat in silence. 2 hours in the air, and not a single word passed between them. When they landed at McMurdo, none of them wanted to unbuckle. The crew had to guide them out, one by one, like children. Their gear was locked away, sealed, shipped off to somewhere in Ohio where strange things go to disappear. And the crew was told what they were always told: nothing happened. No one was missing. Keep your mouth shut. But silence has a weight. You can feel it. And Brian, like every pilot who's flown down there, carried that weight for years. Because once you've seen the ice, once you've seen the places that aren't supposed to exist, you can't unsee them. That's how it is with Antarctica. On the surface, it's endless white. Underneath, it's a vault. And every once in a while, the lock slips open just enough for someone to look inside. You ever notice how some stories don't fade? They stick around even when the people who lived them stop talking. That's the thing with the vanishing at Marie Birdland. It wasn't just a blip in the record. It was a crack in the ice that never closed back up. Pilots still whisper about it. Scientists still avoid questions. And anyone who was there that week walks a little heavier than before. Folks tried to explain it away. Equipment failure, radio blackout, even a simple case of wanderlust. But that doesn't cover the way those 15 people looked when they came back. It doesn't cover the silence in their throats, the way they refused to make eye contact, the way they clutched their bags like life preservers. PTSD, they called it? Sure. But PTSD usually has a visible trigger: war, violence, an accident. What could they have seen in a camp built for weather readings and ice samples that scraped them so clean inside? See, that's when the old stories started lining up. The Piri race map, for one. Drawn in 1513, long before anyone alive had laid eyes on Antarctica. A Turkish admiral patched it together from older charts, or so he said, but take a closer look. The southern coastlines match up too neatly with what we know now. Not ice, but land. Rivers, valleys, mountain ranges that our satellites didn't confirm until the late 20th century. So either Piri Reis was the luckiest guesser in history, or someone long before him had seen Antarctica without its icy shroud. And if that's true, we have to ask, who was walking there? Who was mapping it? Because it sure as hell wasn't us, at least not in the history books we keep. Then, a couple centuries later, Philippe Boissche takes a crack at it. 1737, he draws Antarctica not as one mass, but split into two continents divided by a long inland sea. At the time, everyone laughed it off. Just another cartographer guessing at blank space. But when geologists finally dragged radar over the ice, they found rift valleys, basins, channels deep enough to have been that very same sea. So what's the play here? Coincidence? Or breadcrumbs left by a civilization we've lost track of, buried in libraries that burned, archives that vanished, voices that went silent long before ours. Every time a new discovery surfaces, be it radar scans, subglacial lakes, pyramid-shaped mountains poking out of the snow, these old maps grow sharper, and with them the question grows louder. How did they know? The skeptics will tell you it's misinterpretation, wishful thinking, a trick of the brain connecting dots that aren't really there. But ask yourself, how many coincidences can you stack before it stops feeling like chance? A coastline drawn centuries too early, a continent split the same way radar finds it later, scientists vanishing in the middle of a base only to return as if something had shaken their souls loose. Doors in the ice too perfect for glaciers, lights under the surface, holes clean enough to look like machines carved them. You stack it all together, and it doesn't sound like imagination anymore. It sounds like a pattern, and patterns don't lie. That's why Brian never shook it off. Why Spartan 1 and his men never slept the same after walking through that black octagonal door. That's why even the cartographers of old, 500 years apart, drew the same secrets we're only just now confirming with satellites and seismographs, because something down there isn't gone. It's waiting. Here's where the story gets under your skin. You can brush off maps as coincidence. You can chalk up missing scientists to stress or cold, but you can't unhear what Spartan 1 and his team swore they walked into. These weren't rookies. These were Navy men who knew how to follow orders, how to keep secrets. They weren't looking for ghosts or aliens. They were looking for a drop zone, a recon target, nothing more. But when they crested that ridge along the Beardmore Glacier, they saw something that didn't belong. Imagine it. Endless white, and then suddenly a corner that's too straight, too black, too geometric to be natural. A crown of an octagon, poking up like the tip of a buried fortress. Ice doesn't make octagons. Nature doesn't draw with rulers. But there it was, clear as day. A structure, a door. They approached, weapons tight but hands shaking anyway. The door was massive, higher than a 3-story building, thick as a wall, and etched with symbols none of them could place. Some said it looked like constellations. Others saw triangles and crosses that reminded them of ancient carvings from half a world away. On the lintel, a triangle with two intersecting lines cut through it. Not random scratches, deliberate, intentional, like a warning or a brand. And here's the kicker. It opened. Not with explosives, not with force, but with a push. Smooth as glass, like it was waiting for them. One of the men said later, it didn't feel like they opened it at all, more like it decided to let them in. Inside, the silence grew heavier. The walls glowed faintly, a blue-green light seeping out of the stone itself. No wires, no bulbs, just a glow like bioluminescence locked in rock. Corridors stretched out farther than their flashlights could reach, echoing every footstep a dozen times. On the walls were markings, not quite hieroglyphs, not quite runes, shapes that felt both familiar and alien. Like letters you almost recognize, but can't sound out. One of the scientists with them whispered that this complex, this single space under the ice, stretched out across 2.7 million square meters. That's not a bunker, that's not a hideout, that's a city. And it wasn't the only one. Later, whispers spread that subs had found entrances from beneath, vast under-ice seas with inlets leading straight into chambers no human built. The Navy sealed the reports, stamped them top secret, and Spartan 1 was told the same thing Brian had heard after his medevac flight. Keep your mouth shut. Officially, nothing happened. Unofficially, the nightmares told a different story. What do you do with that kind of knowledge? You walk through a door cut into ice. You see walls glow on their own. You stand in halls older than history, and then you're told to go home and act like it was all a dream. But you can't forget the smell of the air, the way sound bent in those corridors, the way your breath seemed too loud, too fragile, like you weren't supposed to be there. Those men carried it back with them. Some drank it away. Some prayed it away. But none of them ever escaped it. And the strangest part, the more you hear their story, the more it lines up with the old maps. The Boache map with its inland sea, the Piri Reis charting coasts under the ice. What if they weren't guesses at all? What if they were memory, records passed down from a time when those doors weren't buried, when those cities weren't sleeping? People like to laugh at talk of aliens, but tell me this, who built an octagonal door big enough for giants, carved with constellations, hidden beneath a mile of ice? Who left corridors glowing in colors we can't explain, letters we can't read, architecture we can't reproduce? Was it us? An earlier version of us? A civilization erased by time and ice? Or was it someone else, someone who visited and decided to leave their signature in the one place no empire would look? That's the question Spartan carried home. And it's the question that keeps coming back every time the ice shifts, every time another anomaly shows up on satellite scans. Because if one door exists, if one complex sprawls under the Beardmore, then how many more wait beneath the silence? How many vaults have we not opened yet? And what happens when we do? Brian thought he'd seen it all. Flying supply runs in and out of Antarctica will do that to a man. You get used to the white void, the sudden storms, the strange tricks the ice plays on your eyes. But then came the flight that changed everything for him. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a medevac, get in quick, pick up a sick scientist and get out. But the flight path they handed him didn't make sense. Straight through a no-fly zone, marked on maps for reasons nobody ever explained. Usually no-fly means stay alive. Maybe mountains, maybe unstable weather, sometimes secret projects. But this patch of white was flagged hard, like it wasn't meant to be looked at, much less flown over. He asked for clarification. The answer was the same as always. Follow orders. So he did. And what he saw on that run would follow him for the rest of his life. Down there in the middle of nowhere sat a station that didn't look like the others. Most Antarctic outposts are practical. Boxes on stilts, painted bright to stand out against the snow. Antennas bristling, nothing fancy. But this one? Dark, windowless, quiet. Soldiers, not scientists, walked the perimeter. And just beside it, carved into the ice, was a hole. Now you've seen crevasses before. Jagged, uneven, dangerous as hell, but natural. This wasn't that. This hole was circular, clean, as if someone had lowered a drill the size of a skyscraper into the ice and let it burn straight down. 90 meters across, perfectly round. No snow blown inside. Just black, a mouth. Brian banked hard, circled again. The hair on his arms stood up. You don't see geometry like that in nature. He knew it, the crew knew it. Nobody said a word. They just stared, stomachs heavy, until the comms crackled and ordered them to stay on course. He wanted to look longer, but orders are orders. He pulled away, throat dry. They delivered the patient. On the way back, he couldn't shake it. He replayed the sight of that hole over and over. It wasn't random, it wasn't natural, and it sure as hell wasn't safe. When they landed, the briefing was immediate. A man in a suit Brian didn't recognize was waiting. Cold eyes, flat voice. You flew over restricted airspace, he said. Brian started to explain about the route he'd been given, how he didn't have a choice, but the man raised a hand. We're not here to argue, we're here to make sure you understand. And then came the leash. No punishment, no court-martial, just silence. You keep flying, you keep your mouth shut. Talk, and you'll lose more than your wings. Brian agreed. What else could he do? But the image of that hole stayed with him. A hole too perfect, too big, too deliberate. And soon after, he started hearing whispers. Not just from pilots, but from ground crews. Even a few scientists. Whispers about visitors, about meetings no one was supposed to witness, about experiments that used volunteers who hadn't really volunteered. The kind of talk that dies fast if you say it too loud, but keeps people awake at night. And then he remembered the scientists from Marie Byrd Land, the way they clutched their bags, the silence in their throats, the emptiness in their eyes. What if they'd been down that hole? What if whatever waited under the ice had looked back at them, touched them, changed them in a way they couldn't explain? The hole wasn't the only anomaly. Satellites kept catching strange shadows, perfect triangles, too sharp to be mountains, too precise to be chance. Some said pyramids, others said ridges, but the shapes were there, always there. And then the magnetic anomalies, compasses going haywire, instruments spinning, pilots losing bearings in skies that should have been calm. Every piece by itself could be written off, sure, but stack them together, and it felt less like random chance and more like design. That's the thing about Antarctica. It doesn't just hide secrets, it guards them. The silence isn't empty, it's enforced. And every once in a while, someone like Brian stumbles too close to the edge and gets a glimpse of what lies beneath. A black door, a glowing corridor, a hole carved with impossible precision. And then the suits sweep in, slap the silence down, and the world moves on. But those who've seen it don't move on. They can't. They carry it. Spartan 1 carried it. Brian carried it. And the more you listen to their stories, the more you realize they rhyme. They're not identical, but they share a rhythm. And rhythms don't lie. So what's under the ice? Is it a lost civilization erased by time, but not by memory? Is it a base built in secret, joint projects with hands we don't talk about? Or is it something older, stranger, waiting for us to dig too deep? Nobody knows for sure. But one thing's certain, the ice won't hold forever. It's already melting, and when it does, the vault won't stay locked. Some folks say all of this is just stories. They'll roll their eyes, tell you the pyramids are just jagged mountains, the maps are just lucky guesses, the vanished scientists were just stressed out, and the holes in the ice, just glaciers cracking open. Easy answers for uneasy questions. But here's the thing. Easy answers don't keep pilots quiet for decades. Easy answers don't make a whole team of scientists come back silent, refusing to speak. Easy answers don't leave Spartan 1 with nightmares of glowing halls and symbols he couldn't read but somehow understood. So let's talk theories, the ones people whisper but rarely write down. The first is simple. Antarctica once wasn't ice at all. Millions of years ago, it was green, lush, filled with rivers and forests. Science already admits this much. What if a civilization lived there? Advanced, organized, mapping the world long before our history books begin. Maybe the ice came fast. Maybe it buried them whole, sealed their cities like bugs in amber. If that's true, then the Piri race map isn't magic. It's memory, passed down, copied through centuries until it ended up on an admiral's desk. Maybe the pyramids poking out of the snow aren't tricks of geology. They're rooftops, monuments, antennae, whatever they needed them to be. And maybe those corridors Spartan walked weren't alien at all. They were ours, just older than we dare to imagine. The second theory stretches farther. What if Antarctica was never fully ours to begin with? What if visitors came long before us and carved their mark in the only place on Earth guaranteed to keep it hidden? A continent no nation can claim, guarded by storms, cold, and distance. They leave their doors, their halls, their machines buried deep, knowing one day someone curious enough or reckless enough will find them. Maybe that day has already come. Maybe the scientists of '95 walked too far into the dark, saw the wrong thing, touched the wrong switch. Maybe their silence wasn't just fear, it was conditioning, a change. And then there's the third theory, the one nobody wants to say out loud, that it isn't just history buried under the ice. It's activity now. Bases built in secret, experiments run in the shadows, handshakes between men in suits, and figures no one would recognize in daylight. Visitors and hosts, working together, or maybe not working together at all. Some whisper about genetic projects, about hybridization, about learning technology not born here. Others say it's simpler: surveillance, communication, treaties made under the table of the world. Whatever the truth, it leaves the same taste in your mouth. Secrets this big don't stay buried forever. Here's where the story gets under your skin. You can brush off maps as coincidence. You can chalk up missing scientists to stress or cold, but you can't unhear what Spartan 1 and his team swore they walked into. These weren't rookies. These were Navy men who knew how to follow orders, how to keep secrets. They weren't looking for ghosts or aliens. They were looking for a drop zone, a recon target, nothing more. But when they crested that ridge along the Beardmore Glacier, they saw something that didn't belong. Imagine it, endless white, and then suddenly a corner that's too straight, too black, too geometric to be natural. A crown of an octagon, poking up like the tip of a buried fortress. Ice doesn't make octagons. Nature doesn't draw with rulers. But there it was, clear as day. A structure, a door. They approached, weapons tight but hands shaking anyway. The door was massive, higher than a 3-story building, thick as a wall and etched with symbols none of them could place. Some said it looked like constellations. Others saw triangles and crosses that reminded them of ancient carvings from half a world away. On the lintel, a triangle with two intersecting lines cut through it. Not random scratches, deliberate, intentional, like a warning or a brand. And here's the kicker. It opened. Not with explosives, not with force, but with a push. Smooth as glass, like it was waiting for them. One of the men said later, it didn't feel like they opened it at all, more like it decided to let them in. Inside, the silence grew heavier. The walls glowed faintly, a blue-green light seeping out of the stone itself. No wires, no bulbs, just a glow like bioluminescence locked in rock. Corridors stretched out farther than their flashlights could reach, echoing every footstep a dozen times. On the walls were markings, not quite hieroglyphs, not quite runes, shapes that felt both familiar and alien. Like letters you almost recognize, but can't sound out. One of the scientists with them whispered that this complex, this single space under the ice, stretched out across 2.7 million square meters. That's not a bunker, that's not a hideout, that's a city. All right, let's bring it home. Picture this, you and me sitting by a fire, stars overhead, and somebody brings up Antarctica. Most folks laugh, crack a joke about penguins, or say it's just too damn cold to matter. But the ones who've been there, they don't laugh. They stare into the flames a little too long, like they're back on that endless sheet of white, hearing the wind howl through corridors that shouldn't exist. They don't tell you everything. Hell, they can't, but you catch it in the way their voices dip when they talk about the hole, the lights, the door. Words get short when the truth is heavy. And maybe that's the real tell. All the silence. You can spin a tall tale, sure, but you don't get grown men shaking, refusing to step off a plane unless they've looked at something that rewrote their idea of what's possible. And those old maps, those pyramids peeking through the ice, those missions where everyone comes back changed, put them together and it feels less like coincidence, more like breadcrumbs. Like somebody left a trail for us, daring us to follow. Now here's the thing, my friend. Maybe one day the ice gives up its grip. Maybe the vault door swings wide and the world finally sees what's been sleeping under that frozen blanket. Could be ruins, could be tech, could be something that still remembers us. Or maybe it doesn't wait for the ice to melt at all. Maybe it's already awake, already watching, already deciding when it wants to be found. So the next time you look at a globe, trace your finger down to that big white nothing at the bottom. Don't see emptiness. See a locked chest. See the last page of a story we haven't been allowed to read. And remember, ice can keep a secret for a very long time, but not forever, because in Antarctica, the silence isn't empty. It's listening. So what happens when the ice melts more? Climate change isn't waiting for anyone. Every year, the Antarctic skin thins. Satellites peer deeper. Drones fly farther. Sooner or later, something will surface that can't be explained away as a trick of light. A pyramid sharp as a blade. A door wide open. A machine still humming after a million years. And when that day comes, the world we know, the comfortable one where humans think they're at the top of the ladder, changes forever. That's the warning, whether anyone wants to hear it or not. We keep digging, we keep flying, we keep mapping, and sooner or later, we're going to hit something that looks back. And when it does, it won't matter how many reports were sealed, how many flights were classified, how many voices were silenced. The truth has a way of rising. Ice can hold it for a time, maybe even thousands of years, but not forever. You talk to the old pilots, the ones who've retired, and they'll never tell you straight. But watch their eyes when Antarctica comes up. Watch the way they tighten their jaw, the way they sip their drink slower. They know. Maybe not the whole picture, maybe not the why, but enough to understand it isn't just snow down there. Ask them what they believe, and most won't say a word. But one or two will lean in, like they're telling you something they shouldn't, and they'll whisper, "It's not empty, it's listening." And maybe that's the scariest part. The idea that Antarctica isn't just a place, it's a presence. Silent, patient, watching, waiting for us to open doors we can't close. Maybe it's a vault, maybe it's a warning, maybe it's both. But if history's taught us anything, it's that we never stop knocking. So here's my advice, friend to friend. The next time you spin a globe and your finger drifts to that big white mass at the bottom, don't just see ice. See a lock. See a story older than ours. See a question waiting for its answer. And remember this, secrets don't stay secrets forever. Not in politics, not in history, not in the ice. One day Antarctica will speak. And when it does, the only thing that'll matter is whether we're ready to listen. Because the silence out there isn't empty. It never was.